Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's edition of the OTT.X Wednesday webinar series. I'm Eric Hansen. On behalf of the entire team at OTT.X, I want to thank you all for joining us this morning to the series where we bring you insightful, thought-provoking presentations across a broad spectrum of OTT-related topics from thought leaders across our industry. And today, we're very fortunate to have with us Steve Rippin from Rightsline. Steve is the director of Rightsline's Available product, and he's here today to talk about some of the best practices and ideas on how to leverage workflows, software, and communications to stream your avails process, something that everyone is very interested in, avails. First, I want to thank Rightsline for participating in our webinar series today. They've been great supporters of OTT.X, including many of our events and as active members in discussion sessions and working groups. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Steve from Rightsline. Steve, welcome.
Hey everybody, can you hear me?
Yeah, how you doing, Steve?
Fantastic, doing very well. Thanks for having me. Happy holidays, everybody. It's great to be here. I know we've been talking about a session like this for what feels like months and months and months. But you know, I think originally when I was looking at what to talk about today and how to sort of bring some of my expertise to the greater OTT.X community, I think I was thinking back to like, well, what do we do every day? And I think what we're able to do today is sort of talk about some of those ideas, some of the best practices that I give to my customers on a daily basis. For those who don't know, obviously, as Eric mentioned, my name's Steve. I work for Rightsline in a capacity where we look very diligently at avails. We look very diligently at how content and catalog and rights and metadata affect those avails, and how do we streamline processes for our studio partners. And that's something that we do day in and day out. I spend 90% of my time working directly with studio customers of Rightsline, ensuring that their processes are intact and engaged and informative to all parties, right? So we're going to talk a lot about that today. I am going to share a presentation just so you have a reference point while I talk today. And as questions pop up, we'll pause, but I'm hoping that everyone is able to take something away today that they can use either in their own businesses or be inspired. One moment while I present. Awesome. So yeah, once again, thank you guys so much. And yeah, off we go. I think when I started to sort of get ideas around what we should talk about or what would be valuable to the greater community, and a lot of this today, especially with avails and sort of rights management and rights awareness, which we'll talk about, is crucially important and sometimes overlooked. Not all the time, especially with studios who are driving content to their specific retail partners, which we're very familiar with. But I think when you have a lot of data and a lot of upstream systems rooted in maybe old-fashioned ways or different mindsets, because those teams have different needs, wants, and abilities, you know, we sort of see some truncation between those entities. And while I think it's a good thing to have, what we like to do as a solutions company is bring those solutions to the forefront, bring new ideas, bring fresh ideas to help sort of bring that big picture and make it much smaller, even though it's doing the same thing. One second, there we go. So the key questions that were posted in the original description of this talk today are as follows. I'll just read them through so we all have them. What are the best practices around organizing and strategizing the efficient release of hundreds or thousands of titles? We have studio partners that have, you know, back catalogs of 184,000 different titles, and then we have studios with a few hundred. So for us, I don't necessarily care. It doesn't matter. It should never matter what the structure of your content is. And I think that we're able to sort of bring some solutions to the table, which is the point of today. Just to kind of say, hey, you know, it doesn't really matter if you have a really complicated hierarchy or a less complicated hierarchy. How can you automate the process of mitigating the impact to published avails when new deals are struck and then impact, obviously, retail partner windows and pricing? Updates happen, new deals happen, sales teams are proactive. So with that, You know, we'll talk about what it means to de-silo our approaches. How do we make sure that impact doesn't have consequences? And then finally, how is this communicated to partners? And most importantly, how is the granular data tracked for anyone in-house to see and act upon? Once again, we'll talk about themes of siloing and consequences of data that can, you know, put a little bit of strain on workflows. I definitely see it a lot with some of our partners, and I see it in the greater industry. For those who don't know, before I kind of kick into some of the key takeaways here, Rightsline and the product I work on has a two-faceted approach. One, it's an Avails ingest engine where we take Avails from multiple studios, process them through for retail partners, so we can implement different rules and all that good stuff, making sure that everything is intact and the way our retail partners want it to display, whether that's transforming or whatnot. But also recently, over the last year, we've redeveloped a tool that's called Available, of course, which helps basically any studio partner leverage rights and catalog data to easily generate their avails. We just launched today. It's actually happening right now while I'm on this call. I wasn't able to join them, but my team is with them with I am not going to say their name, but they are a very large broadcaster out of the UK. So we're very excited to be a global partner for Avails for them. They struggled for a long time, and I think our solution is great for them and for what they need because it is such a large data set, as I mentioned. Let's kick in. While I was coming up with what to talk about today, I wanted to ask a couple questions. What I do on a daily basis and what my team does on a daily basis is we try to put ourselves in the shoes of a studio that maybe is innovating or wants to innovate. To us, it doesn't really matter because we think and feel and believe that there's always room for growth. There's always room to take a hard look at workflows, especially as technology changes, especially as specs are updated, especially as groups like OTT.X are out there doing the work to make sure everyone has that education point. You know, there's always room for that growth and improvement. One of the questions, if I was a studio, that I would want to know the answer to if I was, you know, a CTO or COO, one of the questions that I would start with at my specific company is, well, how do I create a universe where rights and deals define all the downstream action? And maybe some of you, I can't see anybody, but maybe some of you are saying like, well, we already do that, or that's impossible. I don't know. I don't know. Everyone that I've spoken with has different ideas about this. But for me, taking it very simply, I like to look at it very linearly. Obviously, being part of a software company that does solutions, that, you know, we have to look at things in a certain way. But even outside the box and putting the software aside for a moment, taking a linear approach, especially when you're looking at avails and how to strategize with potentially hundreds, if not thousands, of pieces of content, you know, it's crucial. It's crucial to let the data, but mostly your rights, define everything. You know, I'll paraphrase what's on the sheet here, but every single day I hear about siloed businesses. I hear about, siloed business tracks. And so I see sales teams who are doing X, Y, and Z, and then I see the Avails team who's potentially like either maybe just generating the spreadsheets or the XMLs, or they're physically in a software set trying to figure out and decipher what needs to happen next. But I see these siloed business tracks who don't have a full understanding of what the other hand is doing. From a data set perspective, our recommendation is always to let your deals and rights define everything. Because once you have those data points, you can send the stream downward and everyone should have that source data. We want to make sure people are pulling from the same source data. So as you structure out how your workflows are, source data is absolutely the key. I say the term source of truth probably 10 times a day. When we look at workflows based on that, you know, with hooks in the deal and rights workflows is who needs to be informed and why. It could be a system. It could be a set of systems. Is this a team that has a system? Either way, having those hooks in deals and rights workflows, knowing what those attributes are, is absolutely crucial to being able to have that downstream effect even just from a date perspective, knowing what those dates are and eliminating that confusion is super crucial to making sure that the data flows in an appropriate way. Once again, any actions, changes, updates, expirations, of course, we want to create, not only do those want to have like a cause and effect, but we want to create an informed notification flow. So sometimes what that means is, we have a lot of studios that, well, I can't say a lot of studios, but we have some studios who create avails almost separately from how rights are managed in different facets of their business. They get notifications that specific titles can be availed and maybe the start date at which they can go. But really, all of those other attributes could be rooted in initial discussions, and they could be looking into, okay, what are the rights? And we can be proactive instead of reactive about how that documentation is sent out. When you strategize your catalog hierarchies, always, it's always good to keep avails in mind. One of the examples that I was alluding to just now is we worked with a studio recently over the last 2 weeks, and they've been fantastic, super responsive. Their data hierarchy is amazing. It's very easy for us to work with. However, one of the key parts of what we want to be able to provide for everybody is, well, how do we use rights to inform what the avail should be, right? And they were using the avails to actually inform their rights. So for us, and that's not the first studio I've heard that from, just simply from like a data import standard. What did we avail? Okay, let's go create right sets out of that. While of course, that works for some studios, I think from, an expertise approach, why? Let's let the rights define that for us. And once again, keeping those avails in mind when you have workflows like that are potentially a bit disjointed. Obviously, this is one person's opinion. All catalogs, in theory, will grow. The industry, the reason why we're here is because we're moving towards an even more automated state. So I think collectively, if we all keep in mind as we automate, as we grow, as we innovate, that anything downstream of that piece of innovation, that new idea, that new workflow is going to be key to driving a seamless avail generation workflow for your business. And that's crucially important. I keep saying the word crucially, but I don't think I know another one, because I having dealt with this almost on a daily basis, I think we see not necessarily problems, but I think there are stopgaps that could be solved by using some of the ideas here. Another key to success is centralized data growth. The question that I ask myself when I put myself in the studio's shoes is, what can I do, if anything, to ensure my avails have correct data based on the many requests of my retail partners? We work with some of the major retail partners, and we're also aware of some of the requirements of some of the ones we don't. Everything that we do is rooted in the EMA OTT.X spec. And when we get avails that aren't, obviously it's our job to make sure that data flows perfectly to the retail customers we represent. But also, we want to make sure that there is clear and informed communication coming back out. I think oftentimes, and I don't think this is a bad thing, I think it can be frustrating for some, oftentimes there are communication breakdowns when interpretation of a specific spec is happening, and studios, maybe not the major studios, but some of your medium to small studios are trying to keep up and trying to figure out what the next step is for them. How does it fit their business practice? How do we align on all these different variables? It seems to change so much. I do hear that a lot, and I hear frustration in some of the studio's voices. And you know what? I think at the end of the day, that's okay. And what I would do to combat that and help fix that is, and one of the points that I'd like to make now is, a centralized data source. We see a lot of business practices that have multiple sources for different styles of data. could be different management softwares that try to interact. Some hold, your sales data. Some hold some pricing workflows that you like to do, pricing algorithms, and therefore that pricing is applied to a specific title based on specific rules. We definitely see a lot of territory-based workflows where you have an entity where the US entity does things a little differently than the UK or German entity or Japanese entity. So, I think as an industry, we're going to start to go away from that, all this siloed approach, and it's really hard to manage. Believe me, my business today, we operate in 4 different time zones, and I can't even imagine having a fully global enterprise that would then try to silo into one sort of centralized data source. But I do think if that's something that a specific partner or whoever would be willing to tackle, it would be very, very beneficial and a huge time saver. That's the elimination of spreadsheets. That's the elimination of Excel macros. I know a lot of my studio partners today used to use those, and something that took them maybe an hour or longer now takes them minutes. Obviously, using software, of course. I don't want to harp too much on Available, but I also see individualized workflows within a team where you have different people doing the same thing but differently. That's great, but at the end of the day, that's not scalable. So once again, centralized data source is something that I would recommend as a huge key to success, to ensure that your data is getting out to as many retail partners as possible, as correctly as possible, following as many rules as possible. It makes it easier to connect. It makes it easier to keep your data updated. Another point on this one that I do like to talk about with my studio partners and some of the options that we try to brainstorm with them is, does your workflow have any flexibility? Can you house multiple data sources? I know it sounds like kind of menial and maybe too simple, but oftentimes, one of the suggestions I'd like to make is, well, let's look outside the box. What does it even mean to have title variants? And maybe you have a spreadsheet that has the title of your film and television show with different localizations, and you're kind of filling it out based on the territory. But is there a way to store all of that? We use an idea called tables, which I'm happy to get into, but I think just to even think about it from, well, how do we store all of this so it's centralized, so it can be leveraged? Obviously, we talk about, I know this is only one part of Avails, but you have language and regional based metadata. How do we store all that together? How can it talk to each other so we have a system or build an idea that knows, great, this is a French Avail. Let's pull in the French language ID automatically, right? Regional and partner-based rights associated. How can the rights inform this, right? So normally, like if you have a worldwide rights in and you don't really care and you're sending it off to everybody, okay, fine, that's a good scenario. You don't have a problem. But oftentimes we see, and I'm sure this goes for just about everybody, territorial rights for their content, sometimes partner-based rights for their content. How do we make sure that that's informed? And then IDs. IDs are arguably the most important thing in an Avail. All of our retail partners that we represent right now are using them to essentially drive the entire workflow. Having a centralized point where IDs are stored, sort of limiting confusion, I hope, or even having that mapping to, if you had an ID that you used to use for like a specific content ID, I won't go crazy here, but like a specific content ID, and then now, ALID is always required, of course, but like ALID becomes required and we need to use this ID. Having a centralized data source for those IDs to either be able to pivot to something that a retailer might want, or being able to export your current ID set to be able to sort of do a one-to-one with what's happening in a specific system, especially if changes and updates or even policing for that matter comes into play. that's the number one thing I see almost every day is there's an ID discrepancy, something has changed. Um, and while that's okay, we want to make sure that my customers always have the opportunity to have that not happen. And if it does, of course, we want to give something that's maybe even a little bit more robust, um, and letting the IDs kind of do the work for us rather than create just more confusion. Um, so yeah, I think those are huge keys for success. Eric made a great suggestion earlier. We're just over halfway through of what I wanted to present today. I'd like to stop for any questions or anyone want to make a comment. I don't know who's on the phone or Zoom with us today. I can't see anybody, so I would love to hear some voices if that's at all possible. I'm kind of in a little bit of a hole here, just chatting away. So
You're doing great, Steve. Yeah, and we'd love to get questions. So y'all can either type them into the Q&A bin, which is totally fine. But if you'd rather, or if you'd like to participate and join us here on stage, we'd love to have that as well. Just raise your hand and we can call on you. There's a way to do that on your Zoom kiosk. And while we wait for some folks to jump on, I think that, I've been working in this space for a really long time in the TVOD side, starting from like back in 2005, if you can believe it. That is kind of hard to believe. But, we're increasingly seeing AVOD and SVOD being distribution models and business use models that are becoming more and more prevalent. How are the systems that you're seeing, how are they pertinent in those spaces as well, if they are?
yeah, absolutely. I think it's become really, I hate to harp on the whole COVID thing. We've been talking about it for so long, but at the same time, when you look at systems like Pluto TV, when you look at, basically systems like that are all ad driven, and people cutting the cord at a rapid pace, of course, we all know that. Having AVOD and SVOD workflows I treat them the same. When we develop our software, as any EST, right? Our sort of theory has always been, let's give our customers as many options as they want. And if they want to pivot away from sort of an EST business or include an AVOD style business, we absolutely want to give them the tools to do that. I think from an AVOD perspective and looking at the rights, which hopefully are upstream, obviously those deals are going to look a lot different than just a standard EST deal. But having that as part of your workflow and having that be sort of, well, how do we define an AVOD workflow? Okay, so the deal defines that, and then we obviously have like just the follow through all the way down the chain. But really, it doesn't change the end result. And I think from those platforms that require or are taking AVOD avails, they for the most part, as far as we can tell, we're just here to make sure that is proper on those avails. But it's still going to be the same similar workflow getting us there.
Yeah, and it is, in some cases there's more complexity to it, but it's one thing about avails in the subscription and AVOD space is that there's the exclusivity to the licensing that you don't see as much in TVOD.
Correct. Yeah, and I think one of those things, I haven't talked about it yet, but one of the things that we look at in this idea that we've concocted of rights awareness is we have different dimensions of the rights that we look at. Obviously, we're looking at the territory. Obviously, we're looking at the different retail partners, but exclusivity versus non-exclusivity is probably the number one factor, because it tells us and informs the rest of the avails, the rest of your business model, what you can and can't do. So yeah, absolutely, it does get more complicated. But once again, if you're looking from day one, step one, looking if a specific title is exclusive versus non-exclusive, it'll actually help the rest of your business, because then that's kind of out of the way and you can kind of go to town on the rest of your catalog.
Yeah, it's the core of everything, that your rights and what you're doing with them. And it does speak to the importance of having a single source, centralized source of truth. So you know. We have a couple of questions here. Here's one from Sean Everson. Hi, Sean. Glad you're
No,
here. And his question is, can you please elaborate on the Rightsline tables functionality that you mentioned?
I can. I was trying hard. I know we have like sort of a no ad policy, but I think if you'd indulge me for a moment, one of the cool things about Rightsline is, and for those who know, amazing, we're glad you're on board. And for those who aren't, we'd be excited to chat, of course. But Rightsline tables functionality is something that we've leveraged to house different data sets. So basically the way we look at data is, especially when generating avails, is it can live anywhere in Rightsline, that source of truth you just mentioned, Eric. Tables is really just an if-then function of Rightsline, where you can store data and have and sort of silo your territory-based workflows. You can silo different macros that you might use, but keeping it in your software set. So in the Avail sense, what we use tables for is actually for IDs on a per retailer basis. So we can store multiple IDs on the same title, and therefore when avails are generated for an Amazon or Google Play or whoever, we pull in the correct data, because once again, defining it upstream helps to inform all the downstream properties of your avail. That's just one basic example of what we use tables for, and it's a pretty robust and also simply executed part of Rightsline.
That's cool that you're able to do that at a partner or a retailer, by a retailer perspective.
Yeah.
Here's a question from our friend Devinder Luthra. Hi, Devinder. Glad you're here. His question is, what metadata fields do you see as typically less well prepared or incomplete coming in from content creators, aggregators, or international distribution?
I wish my avails manager, Jenny, because she's an absolute genius at this stuff, was on the call, but I do think from an incomplete stance, I don't know if I would necessarily use incomplete. I'd probably say, sorry, this is a tough question. And the reason why it's a tough question is because for the most part, our software and the way my team has operated is, we don't even see incomplete avails. We have policing steps up front. We've built an ingestion engine that takes a look at all of those rules before we even get it. However, one thing that I would say that, and I know I briefly mentioned it, is I'd say that maybe not incomplete avails, but I would say avails with discrepancies I'd say we see title changes quite a bit. And even when you have an automated system, of course, simple, small title changes that are done manually upstream can definitely cause complication. IDs, we see a lot of ID inconsistency. We do write software all the time to help police that and help our retail partners get the exact data that they need, even when updates happen, and then obviously mitigate that confusion that is potentially there between a studio and a retailer. But yeah, I think, I'm sorry I didn't answer your question as from a specific field, but I will say that, yeah, I would, from a sheer confusion standpoint, and what's causing the most confusion is anticipated IDs or historical IDs that are then updated. That's what we see the most right now today. That's just been sort of the topic of conversation with my team.
Yeah, IDs are, and if you're an organization that's getting, maybe you're an independent or a smaller content creator or a kind of a new upcoming platform, and you're maybe just getting started in this space, and you're using Excel and it seems to work okay. Given the fact that you probably have aspirations of growing, it's just something to think about. Like really think about your ID structures and build them in a measured, deliberate way. You'll save yourself so much headaches.
Yeah.
All right. Well, with that, I want to turn it back over to you, Steve, to carry on with your presentation. We'll take some more questions later on towards the end.
Sounds good. Thank you guys so much. Thanks for, okay, perfect. Yeah, I mean, I'll stay in the vein that I was at. I honestly don't have much more. Obviously, there's a little bit more here that I want to take you guys through. Um, and then yeah, we'll do questions, more questions. This is fun. This is awesome, actually. I was really nervous going into this that it would just be like talking and then no feedback. But thank you guys so much for your questions. This is great. Um, Sort of transitioning into a little bit of what I do with the team every day, and a little bit of what is possible out there. And Eric, that's a really great point. You know, a lot of studios or a lot of content owners or a lot of channels, I guess you could say, that are starting out in this space, or even retailers that are starting out in this space. Um, Start, you know, the best advice there is think big but early, and sometimes that's hard to do. There's budgets, I know, but if you can start to try to handle or have that 5-year look or 5-year goal of where you want to be, you can start to, or even 10 years for that matter, you can start to sort of see what scale really looks like. And it's cool that OTT.X is bringing us together, because they certainly have the tools to allow you to do it. um, I work a lot with people who generate avails. I don't work a lot with the people who are doing the deals and doing the sales teams and acquiring the content. Um, so I like to put myself in their shoes. I know I keep saying that, but as a person who's trying to find solutions and trying to inspire solutions, and trying to guide my team, um, that's what I do all day. So one of the other questions that I've been thinking about a lot recently is, how can I take into account all of the moving factors of my sales team and ensure my downstream systems are getting updates in a timely manner? I think what I've seen, I've been doing this for the better part of 2 years. I started learning the Avails ingest business, and then I pivoted more into this Avails generation software set for Rightsline. Um, and what I've noticed is the big gap is between, well, and this is an example from a studio that I work with, is, well, our sales team is not going to change their ways, so we just need to deal with it, which is a great problem for someone like me and my team to solve, because that's what we do. Like, okay, great, well, here's the set of rules we need to follow, let's make something awesome. But as a person who represents people who generates avails, we need to start looking at, this is sort of a little bit of an insight to that process of how we start to look at it, and in a best practice around that. The big title here is automation. Yes, of course, and I know I have it at the bottom here, software helps with that. But when I talk about automation, I actually don't, I'm referring to, of course, using software to help you do your work. But automation, for me, is asking the question, what do I have at my fingertips that I can leverage to make my job easier? So I think for me, that's a really, really important mindset to have. Of course, some of the things that I look at from an avails and rights standpoint is, well, what do I have what do I have? What are the features of those rights? How are they documented? Are there dates? Are there territories? Once again, Eric, to the point you brought up earlier, exclusivity versus non-exclusivity. How do we define those workflows? Yes, of course, automation, but even from a person-to-person workflow standpoint, having that common agreement of downstream notifications or expectations, which I don't have on here, but is also very important, um, is prime. Like, you must have that, or else there will be breakdown, there will be more email, there will be frustration, and I've seen it. One of the things that I like to think about, and sort of, it's not really a mantra, but one of what I try to do is work with customers to eliminate consequences, right? So everything that we do, whether we're a studio or a retailer, whether we're even in day-to-day business, is everything we do has downstream effects. They might not have consequences. However, if there's disjointed communication from the original source of where this data is originating from, there are downstream consequences. And sometimes it takes a long time to generate avails. And most, if not all, studios are working way far out getting these avails generated. And then maybe we generate our title level metadata avails closer to production. But I think streamlining that process will once again eliminate those consequences. That's just one example. Another thing that I've seen too, and this is only because we map a lot of existing hierarchies that have existed in different kinds of software sets. Invest in a serviceable hierarchy. It's very, very important to make sure that when you build out your catalog, however you may do it, does the data translate? How do we make sure that we have an understanding with the people we want to sell our content to? And I know I'm speaking specifically to like an EST and transactional avails here, but I think it definitely rings true. Does our data translate not just in the sales world with our pricing algorithms or whatever we need to get our job done, but to any workflow that needs to reference it? Once again, I know I'm going back to my first slide, but that linear approach is something that I think is true. I think it holds true. And then from a data translation standpoint, it would be hugely beneficial. And I'm biased, but software certainly helps us all do that. And that it's important. Let's jump to the next one. Last one, I promise. When I work with studios and when I work with our retailers who are getting avails ingested, at the end of the day, if the data is not right, or if there's issues with the data, or if there are assumptions made on the data, or if I could go on, the real question here for I think everybody is, what steps can I take as a studio? And I'll even add retailer or channel or partner or service to ensure my data is communicated to partners accurately. One of the terms that we've coined, I hope and I think, I don't have it copywritten or anything, but is called rights awareness. And it's at first, I think it was a mentality that how do we inform our data? How do we make sure data is as informed as humanly possible? And for us, it's a concept that an avail that's informed is going to be better off in the long run. We're once again, rights defined upstream and inform that territorial start and end date and other key rights factors. That's how it works. And then to give our customers a solution where they don't have to worry about that because their documentation, because their database is now informed and proactive on their behalf, it mitigates a lot of downstream issues when sending out this data to a respective retail customer. Obviously, it becomes an end game where users already know what they can and can't do because their workflow is informed. It also provides proactive error tracking, where sometimes what I've seen is I actually talked to a studio just last week who said, "Hey, I have this avail. There's issues with it, but I don't know what they are." Okay. How do you usually fix that problem? Well, we submit it and then we get feedback, and then I still really am really confused. At the end of the day, the issue was fixed by a pricing error, just a simple pricing error on the avail. But if you have that proactive error tracking, you're going to gain that time back. You're going to gain that error tracking, that chase, and also you're going to reduce email stress, which I know we all suffer from in one way, shape, or another. I was talking with a prospective studio on Monday of this week, and we were showing them different ideas. They gave us some use cases, which is usually how things go. Hey, can you do these 4 things? Maybe not, I don't know. And a customer asked me 2 questions that I had never been asked before in the years that I've been doing this. The first question that they asked was, what is the weakest point of your software? Of course, we were talking about the software. And I said, from a software perspective, the weakest point is it's so specific, right? And you hate saying that, because from a software set, we want to be general. We want to be agnostic to everybody. But when we talk about rules and regulations and making sure that those are met so your data gets out into the retail sphere accurately, we need specificity. So I understand that people get frustrated when they walk in the day one and they don't understand some of the specs, they don't understand some of the terminology. Um, Retail rules can be complicated. If there's territory-based rules, or if there's certain columns that are maybe abnormal, that are used, it's hard to pivot away from that for one retailer, right? So if you do something for everybody, of course, that's simple, but for the most part, it is hard to sort of silo off those retailers. But that can be frustrated. That's something we do really well, but my customers are really frustrated by it because it's hard to understand sometimes, especially at all of the different levels that people exist in our little industry here. Um, and then they asked, what does it do best? And I said, speed. I think if you take into account a lot of the ideas, or some or a few of the ideas I presented today, all of us in some way, shape, or form are trying to get um, operational scale. The days of manual are going by the wayside. Catalogs are growing. Companies are merging. Catalogs are merging. And I think, once again, using this top-down approach, letting the data speak for itself, letting the data drive your operation and drive your end result, you'll get that speed. And that's sort of where I'll leave you guys today, because I think that we have a lot of work to do. We have a long ways to go. My team and I are always trying to innovate. What is the next new thing that we can add to our product, of course, but out there, what are the problems that need to be solved? So I think this is where my brain has been at over the last couple of months. Obviously, this is one person's opinion, but I love being a part of this community because we get to sit down and talk about stuff like this that normally, you just in your home office now, of course, and just kind of thinking this stuff up on your own. With that, thank you guys so much for having me, and have an awesome holiday. But I do want to open the floor for questions, since I think we have about 10 minutes left.
Yeah, absolutely. We'd love to get some more questions, so please jump into that Q&A bin and let us know what you'd like to talk about, or raise your hand and we can welcome you up here with us. We talked a lot, Steve, about, kind of mentioned from the perspective of a content creator, a studio that's got content, they have rights and they're licensing it, but it's obviously just as important for someone that's licensing content to keep track of the rights that they have. And it's really, I think it's something, in a way, if you're a platform that's licensing content, it might be something that you are overlooking a little bit. Hey, we're just going to get rights, we'll get content, we'll get assets, we're going to make them available, and we'll just keep having those sent from our licensors. But it really becomes a source of your kind of the starting point for everything you're doing if you're a retailer, doesn't it? It helps you. This is where your plan starts. If you don't know and it changes every single day, what you have rights for, where you have rights for it, and if you don't have a way to track that and report on it and have it drive your workflow, you won't be getting your content up on time, and that's vital.
Exactly. And even on top of that, we work with a lot of partners that just get everything. That's fine. But if you have a curated platform, it's even more important to know exactly what you have and when. So as you work with your partners to sort of define that, it only makes that curation process easier. It only makes that downstream trickle effect more in line with how you want your business to run, I would assume, of course. So yeah, I think it's crucial in any facet to just, it's a preparedness thing.
This isn't a luxury, this is a requirement, and it's got to start with what you've licensed, and it gets more and more complicated as the world is getting more and more connected, and as the expectations are that content is going to be available all over the world. There's just, like, with content ratings and with languages and different localization types and subs and dubs, you have to start. If it's simple for you now, that's great. This is the time to start building a system that's going to accommodate when it gets really complicated. And if it's really complicated and you haven't got to that point, then the recommendation is to buckle down and make it happen. Get a centralized system, whether you're working with a company like Rightsline or any of our other great members that are vendors, or you're doing this yourself. The recommendation is to really commit to managing your rights in a smart way. And that's one of the things we spend a lot of time talking about it in the supply chain working groups. It's funny. It's never. I don't think it's ever going to go away. When I started working in this space, it was the thing we talked about, and it just keeps going. It's what we spend most of our time in our supply chain working groups talking about. We do have a question from one of our attendees, and this has to do with the way that windows are changing. And obviously, we're seeing the TVOD windows and the theater windows, and they're obviously compressing, and in some cases maybe going away a little bit. How are you seeing your software? How does this impact your software and your solution as in terms of managing existing deals and new deals that are being made? Is this changing things for you?
Yeah, I think I think from a Rightsline perspective, we're in a really prepared place, because for us, I think knowing that Rightsline, and we'll put the available side of this aside for a second. Rightsline being a system that can adapt to whatever it's being asked to do is very good for our studio customers. Obviously, I work for the company. I'm going to say that, but I believe it, and the reason why is as we see the TVOD space grow. Obviously, when you look at like HBO Max and Warner Brothers basically saying everything's going to go on our app, and we're going to go to the theater as well. But at the same time, where does the user start to pivot, right? Where does the audience start to pivot? I think for us and for our software, and when we look at those windows, what we would always want to answer is the question of, well, how do we provide you the tools to just be able to track that? And then once again, no matter what those windows are, no matter how those windows are developed, once again, driving from the deal, driving from the rights, or I should say windowing being built on top of the rights, do we have a tool that will let studios make those changes and then use those changes to inform the downstream effect? And I can proudly say that we certainly do that. And we want to make sure that we're adaptive to what this landscape is going to look like. I was trying to avoid COVID so much, but COVID has changed the media landscape. And it's going to continue to change the media landscape, whether we like it or not. Are the movie theaters gone? I don't know the answer to that, but man, does it seem like it. And I think that having the ability to pivot easily, so studios can make the most money, of course, from their distributed TVOD content. Yeah, we've certainly thought about it, and we definitely want to make sure that we're giving our users the tool set to be able to do so.
It's interesting. I didn't even, coming from a TVOD or a retailer background, I didn't even really realize until, I guess, kind of recently that from a studio perspective, their rights are changing on a daily basis. And you'll be trying to do a deal with the studio, and you've got a list of titles that you think you're locked in on, and the next day, 10% of them aren't there anymore because they licensed them to somebody else. And that's a really, a big problem for studios, to be able to keep track of that, because they have, a large studio will have multiple people doing business deals. And if that doesn't get recorded into a system, then you've just licensed something to my retail platform that you already licensed exclusively to somebody else, which obviously you can't do. So it's really important to keep that, to have a centralized system or a way to do that. I'm interested on the AVOD side, and in particular about advertising. Have you guys thought much about managing, or maybe you have, managing rights for advertisements, for advertising content. There must be a whole lot of complexity for that as well. If I develop production for an ad and I've licensed some music for it, I'm sure that's bound by, a bunch of different things, locations that I can use that music in, and maybe even, dates. So I've got this production done, but I can't have it airing anywhere after this date because my music rights run out. Is that something you're thinking about, or is that within the scope of what Rightsline might be working on?
Sure, and even like this, even down to the splits. Obviously, we're in a fortunate position to be general about what our software can help manage. I know, looking into 2021 and beyond, without going too crazy, we're excited to start to look at different spaces. We've been a part of the TV, movie, media landscape for a really long time, but one of the things that I think I can say is, yeah, we're basically open to anything because we believe our software can manage it, especially the ad space. The software is agnostic to what you want to track and how you want to use it. So I think definitely.
There's my dog.
Oh, that's okay.
Hi. Okay, hold on.
He's like, enough Zoom calls.
Okay, Simon.
I don't blame him.
He's fierce. Nice little Boston Terrier.
Nice.
Yeah, so I guess if I have rights that I want to license, it's something to think about. Managing it and tracking it in a systematic way. I can't recommend thinking about that strongly enough. It'll never go away as something that's a really vital thing in your business if you're in this space, and it helps you grow as well. Then once you have a strong, as Steve mentioned, hierarchy for the way that you think about your content, you can add rights to it. If we started off in TVOD, and then we had SVOD, now there's AVOD and fast and linear, and there'll be something else, some other kind of VOD or something that folks are going to want to be able to track or want to be able to license and distribute on. And you have to go back and reorganize your entire content library. Every time something new comes along, or redo it, and you have, okay, well, now we have another vertical system for SVOD, and we'll build a whole nother one for AVOD. You're going to be behind, and it's going to really slow you down if not just, it will drive you crazy, and you'll end up working way more hours than you want to on something that shouldn't be taking that much of your time. You should be spending more time innovating in your product and building better experiences for your customers. I'm sure most people would agree. All right. Well, Steve, we're about at time. I would love spending some time talking with you more about rights, and as we typically do, even when we're out cavorting around Manhattan, we typically end up talking about avails and rights management. It's just what we do, I guess.
Yeah, it's been fun. I really appreciate you guys having me on. Thanks to everybody for joining. If there's any questions, obviously LinkedIn's there, whatever you guys need. I really, really appreciate you guys bringing me on to be able to chat today, and yeah, hope to do it again soon.
Oh, you know what? We have a question.
Okay.
Let's see. From Vivian Kim. She's actually raised her hand. So Vivian, are you there?
Hello.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi. Oh, yeah. So is it possible to get Steve's contact info, like email address? I know you mentioned LinkedIn, but.
Yeah, you're speaking. You're meaning Steve's email contact information?
Yes, because I have more
Yeah,
questions coming from it.
absolutely. Steve, do you want to just make that available right now? We can paste it into the chat.
Is that what I can do? All right, hold on one second, you guys.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's okay.
Why don't we do that? And just send it out to everybody.
How do I do that?
That would be great.
I can do it, Steve.
Yeah, can you? Sorry, I think it's because I'm screen sharing.
Yeah.
actually. There we
Zoom
go.
does some things really well, and like managing all these, I have so many different screens popping up all the time. And here we go.
I
So
got it right
Steve's
here.
email is now in the chat. So do take advantage of that and drop him a line.
Thank you so much.
Is it
Cool.
there? It looks like it says privately, but
It does, doesn't it?
Not seeing it yet.
it's because I did it. Hold on one second. Panelists and attendees. There we go. 2 seconds.
There we go.
Seeing it now.
Boom, touchdown.
That's right. Okay, cool.
Thanks,
Well,
everybody.
Thanks very much, Steve, for jumping on with us today. It was really, really great to see you, and great presentation. Really enjoyed it.
Appreciate it. Bye, everyone.
And with that, we're concluding our webinar for the day and also for the year. It's been great having so many of you join us so many times to take advantage of the technology that we have available and the great resources that we have amongst our members across so many different topics in the OTT sphere. As always, the session was recorded and it'll be available on the OTT.X website. So check it out there at OTT.X.org. As an OTT.X member, you can get your hands on the PowerPoint presentation and a whole lot of other presentations from all of our webinars and events. This, as I mentioned, concludes our webinar series for 2020. So it's been great learning together, adapting, and supporting each other during these very different times, I guess. We've got a great calendar of webinars set up already for next year. And our first one on the Wednesday webinar series is January 6th. We've also got our first major event in March 9th through the 11th is the OTT.X Spring Summit. So we hope to see all of you there, and bring your friends. You can find out more about all of these events at our website, OTT.X.org. And with that, we'll close it up. Thanks, everybody. Have a great rest of your day and happy holidays.